Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Pam Bondi, eyes flashing with defiance, leaned forward across the polished wooden bench. The courtroom, once filled with the murmurs of lawyers and observers shifting in their seats, fell into a stunned silence as her tone rose, sharp and commanding. "Answer me, Judge Chen," she shouted, her words ricocheting against marble walls, echoing louder than anyone expected. Reporters jolted upright. Cameras clicked with frantic urgency, capturing the moment as if history itself had paused to take notes. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. This was no ordinary exchange. It was a spectacle. The kind of confrontation people would argue about in coffee shops, replay on late-night shows, and dissect endlessly across social media feeds. Pam Bondi wasn't just speaking, she was performing. Every syllable was laced with accusation, every gesture calculated to dominate the space. The force of her delivery suggested victory was hers before the debate even began. To many, it looked like she had cornered her opponent, her voice a storm, designed to drown out reason, and there at the center of the storm sat Judge Edward Chen. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise a brow or shuffle a single page of... To understand why this clash mattered, one had to look beyond the courtroom walls. This wasn't just an argument about procedure or legal interpretation. It was a battle of values, a moment where two visions of America collided under the glare of public scrutiny. On one side stood Pam Bondi, her reputation long defined by television sound bites and a flair for spectacle. She embodied a politics of volume, the belief that forceful words and louder tones could substitute for substance. To her supporters, she was a fighter. To her critics, she was a symbol of brash arrogance, the personification of how noise drowns out reason in today's public square. On the other side sat Judge Edward Chen, a man whose life had been shaped by an entirely different philosophy. Born to immigrant parents who worked tirelessly to carve out a future in a land that didn't always welcome them, Chen carried himself with the quiet pride of someone who knew dignity required no theatrics. He had risen through decades of disciplined service, each step measured, each decision grounded not in ego, but in principle. Where Bondi's style thrived on disruption, Chen's presence embodied steadiness, the kind that reassures even in the fiercest of storms. This was more than a clash of personalities. It was a mirror held up to America itself. At stake was not simply the decorum of a single courtroom, but the question of what kind of nation we are becoming. Do we reward those who scream the loudest, who bully their way into headlines and demand obedience through intimidation? Or do we honor the power of restraint, the belief that calm conviction can disarm even the wildest fury? The room itself seemed to wrestle with that question. Every gasp, every whispered remark among the spectators reflected the tension between those two competing forces. Some leaned forward, thrilled by Bondi's aggression, mistaking noise for strength. Others watched Chen almost in disbelief as he remained motionless, as if anchored by something far deeper than the tempest swirling around him. And beyond that courtroom, the stakes grew heavier. In living rooms across the country, families would soon see the replay on their television screens. On phones in subway stations, commuters would scroll past the clip, some cheering, others recoiling. It was destined to trend, destined to spark debate, not only about Bondi or Chen, but about who we are as a people and what we choose to value. Because in moments like these, symbols are born. Bondi was a symbol of the politics of outrage, of the belief that domination is achieved by sheer force of will. Chen was the symbol of another path, one rooted in patience, principle, and the quiet certainty that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. The stakes could not have been higher. Every second that ticked by only deepened the suspense. Would Chen finally break under Bondi's relentless volume? Would he give in to anger and meet fire with fire? Or would something else happen? Something no one in that chamber expected. Something that would echo far beyond those walls. No one knew yet, but everyone could feel it, and the answer was coming. And when it did, it would leave a mark on the nation's memory that no camera flash could ever fully capture. Pam Bondi did not stumble into the spotlight by accident. For years, she had cultivated her image as the no-nonsense prosecutor, the sharp-tongued attorney who could slice through opponents with the force of her rhetoric. Rising to national attention as Florida's Attorney General, she built a reputation not only on her legal work, but on her ability to turn every press conference into theater. She understood the power of the camera, the currency of a headline, the way one explosive phrase could eclipse pages of nuanced argument. In the early years of her career, this strategy worked brilliantly. Bondi positioned herself as the face of toughness, a defender of values wrapped in a polished media. Persona, her high-profile cases often tinged with Edward Chen's story, begins far from the marble floors of the federal courthouse. He was born the son of immigrants who had crossed oceans in search of possibility, who arrived in America carrying little more than resilience and the dream that their children might live a life untouched by the hardships they had endured. His parents worked long hours, his father in a factory, his mother in service jobs, always with the quiet dignity of people who believed that perseverance was a form of victory. From an early age, Chen absorbed that lesson. While other children raced through afternoons of leisure, Edward often sat at the kitchen table, his books spread out beside him as his mother looked on, reminding him softly that education was the bridge no one could take away. The prejudice he encountered in his youth only sharpened his sense of purpose. When classmates mocked his heritage or questioned his place, he didn't retaliate with anger. He carried those moments inward, letting them fuel a determination to prove that belonging wasn't granted by approval, it was earned through service, through excellence, through character. That resolve carried him through the halls of higher education. At the University of California, he was not the loudest voice in the room, but he was the most deliberate. Professors noticed his ability to listen with intensity, to cut through noise and arrive at the heart of an argument with unshakable clarity. Law school refined that gift into a discipline. Where others sharpened their tongues, Chen sharpened his patience. He learned that the law was not merely a set of rules, but a philosophy. The idea that justice required both firmness and restraint. Years later, as he rose through the ranks of the legal world, that philosophy became his signature. Chen was never the showman, never the headline chaser. He was the steady hand called upon in complex cases where tempers flared and politics threatened to overwhelm principle. Colleagues described him as unflappable, a man who could endure hours of heated testimony without so much as a shift in his expression. His strength was not in drowning others out, but in letting the storm spend itself against the wall of his composure. When President Barack Obama nominated him to the federal bench, the decision was met with both celebration and controversy. For some, his appointment represented a triumph. The son of immigrants, elevated to a position of immense responsibility. Proof that America could indeed make good on its promise of inclusion. For others, his quiet liberal convictions drew suspicion. He was questioned, criticized, subjected to hearings that tested not only his record but his patience. Through it all, Chen never lashed out. He answered calmly, methodically, his responses, grounded in both fact and dignity. Even his critics admitted that his steadiness was disarming. On the bench, he carried that same philosophy into every ruling. He listened even when voices in his courtroom rose in anger. He weighed arguments, not by volume but by merit. To attorneys who sought to rattle him with theatrics, he offered only silence, forcing them to confront the weakness of noise without substance. For Chen, patience was not passivity, it was strategy, a discipline honed over a lifetime of watching. Chaos consumed those who mistook rage for strength, and yet beneath that calm exterior, there was fire. His life had taught him that injustice did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it hid in plain sight. He knew the sting of being underestimated, the ache of being told to wait your turn, to quiet your voice, to accept less than your worth. That memory lived within him, not as bitterness but as resolve. Every decision he made on the bench was informed by that experience. The belief that fairness was not optional, that dignity was not negotiable. It was this lifetime of quiet perseverance that prepared him for the moment when Pam Bondi stormed into his courtroom. She came armed with volume and bravado, certain her force could bend the atmosphere to her will. But Chen had weathered storms, far more dangerous than a raised voice. He had endured prejudice, political scrutiny, and the relentless demands of justice itself. Every challenge had taught him the same lesson. True strength requires no shouting. And so, as Bondi's fury landed on him, as her accusations echoed through the chamber and cameras sought to capture the image of a judge under siege, Chen remained still. Not because he was weak, not because he was indifferent, but because he understood something Bondi never had. That silence wielded with purpose is more powerful than rage. And when Bondi's fury landed on him, that lifetime of discipline became his greatest weapon. The air was thick with tension as Pam Bondi pressed forward, her voice rising like a tide that refused to retreat. She slammed her palm against the lectern for emphasis, her tone dripping with disdain. "This court is turning its back on the American people," she barked, each word sharpened into a weapon. Observers shifted uneasily in their seats. Some scribbled frantically into notebooks. Others simply stared, caught between fascination and disbelief. Bondi leaned in again, her finger stabbing the air as though the gesture itself carried authority. "You're undermining justice, Judge Chen. You're protecting the very people who threaten our nation's values." Her words poured out rapid fire, a torrent designed not to persuade. The silence that followed Pam Bondi's last outburst was deafening. For a full heartbeat, it seemed the room itself held its breath. Cameras stilled, reporters froze their pens mid-scribble, and all eyes locked on Judge Edward Chen. He had not moved throughout her tirade, hadn't flinched, hadn't so much as tapped a finger against his desk. But now, as the echoes of Bondi's fury faded into the marble walls, he slowly lifted his gaze. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't defiance. It was simply presence, measured, steady, unshaken. And in that moment, the imbalance of power shifted. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his voice calm, almost gentle. The words dropped into the silence like the first stone into a still pond, ripples spreading with unexpected force. "You have accused this court of turning its back on the American people. But let us be clear. The judiciary does not bend to volume, nor does it answer to theatrics. It answers only to the Constitution." Gasps fluttered through the rows of the spectators. Some leaned forward instinctively, drawn in by the quiet confidence with which he spoke. Bondi stiffened, her jaw tightening, as if bracing for what might come next. Chen let the pause linger, deliberately stretching the silence until the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Then he continued, his words precise, each one deliberate. "You claim that by ensuring due process, this court undermines justice. But justice is not served when voices shout louder than facts. Justice is not safeguarded by anger, but by adherence to principle. The rule of law requires patience. It requires evidence. It requires discipline." Again, the room stirred. A few muffled coughs, the scratch of a pen, the faint click of a camera shutter. But beneath it all, a hush that seemed to draw everyone closer. Bondi opened her mouth, but Chen raised a single hand, not in command, but in subtle insistence. The gesture silenced her more effectively than any gavel could have. He pressed forward, stone after stone. "You accuse this court of protecting those who threaten our values, yet the very values you claim to defend, freedom, fairness, equality before the law, are meaningless without restraint. They collapse the moment we allow anger to replace evidence, or passion to replace truth." A collective murmur swept through the gallery. The balance had shifted entirely. Where Bondi's energy had once dominated the room, now her fury seemed almost fragile in contrast to Chen's stillness. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, not rising in volume, but in weight. "Ms. Bondi, shouting does not make an argument stronger. Interrupting does not make it more persuasive, and accusing without proof does not make it true. The louder the noise, the weaker the foundation." Bondi's face flushed crimson. She shuffled her papers, but the sound of crinkling sheets only underscored her unraveling composure. Chen paused again. This time, his silence felt like a verdict. Every second of quiet was another crack in Bondi's armor. "Consider this," he said finally, his tone sharpening just enough to cut. "If the American people were watching, and indeed they are, what do they see in this courtroom? They see a choice between volume and virtue, between anger and principle, between the fleeting satisfaction of a headline and the enduring strength of the law." A sharp intake of breath echoed from somewhere in the back row. One reporter, unable to help himself, mouthed the words, "Wow." Even some of Bondi's allies in the audience exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence eroding with each syllable. Chen let the silence return, the weight of his words settling like dust after a storm. His eyes never left Bondi's. Not accusatory, not cruel, just unyielding. "Miss Bondi," he said at last, "this court does not answer to your volume. It answers to the truth. And the truth, unlike outrage, requires no shouting." The words fell with finality like a gavel strike. Gasps erupted. A few quiet smirks flickered across faces in the crowd, though quickly suppressed in deference. To the gravity of the moment, Bondi blinked rapidly, her lips parting as though to fire back. But nothing came. Her voice, the weapon she had wielded so confidently, failed her in the face of his composure. For the first time, it was she who looked small in the chamber. Chen sat back, folding his hands, his expression unchanged. He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't leaned on theatrics. And yet, with a few calm sentences, he had dismantled every accusation, leaving Bondi's fury exposed as hollow noise. The silence that followed was not the same as before. This time, it was reverent, almost electric, charged with the sense that something monumental had just unfolded. Reporters scribbled furiously now, their notes desperate to capture the phrasing, the tone, the atmosphere of the exchange. Camera shutters clicked in a frenzy. The public gallery sat frozen in awe. Bondi's shoulders slumped slightly, her earlier bravado drained. Her hand trembled as she shuffled her notes again, but it was clear the performance had ended. The stage now belonged to Chen. And yet he did not gloat. He did not press his advantage with cruelty or mockery. He simply allowed the silence to do what Bondi's volume never could, reveal the truth. His final words lingered in the air, unchallenged, unshaken. And in that lingering quiet, the message was unmistakable. Dignity had triumphed over arrogance. The nation, though scattered across living rooms and news feeds, felt it in unison. They would replay this clip again and again, parsing every pause, every glance, every perfectly measured phrase. Because what Judge Edward Chen had delivered was more than a rebuttal. It was a lesson, one that exposed the fragility of outrage, when met with unbreakable calm. And then, with the nation watching, Chen finally spoke his last line, his voice as steady as it had been from the start. "The law does not tremble before anger." The words struck like thunder, quiet thunder, but thunder nonetheless. Bondi froze, the room fell utterly still, and in that silence her unraveling was complete. The shockwave spread instantly beyond the courtroom walls. The courtroom doors had barely closed when the storm erupted beyond its walls. Within minutes, videos of the confrontation flooded social media feeds. Each clip looping Bondi's shouted accusations against Chen's unflinching calm. Hashtags appeared as if by magic. "I'll calm over chaos," or "Judge Chen, Pam Bondi meltdown." Some were celebratory, praising Chen's poise. Others were mocking, turning Bondi's outbursts into memes that spread faster than wildfire. One clip of her finger pointing mid-sentence was captioned, "When volume meets virtue." Another juxtaposed her yelling with Chen's serene expression, highlighting the stark contrast like a visual punchline that no one could unsee. News anchors could barely keep up, their commentary laced with astonishment. "This is not just a courtroom moment," one anchor intoned. "It's a cultural moment." Judge Chen's composure is historic, a masterclass in restraint that every lawyer, politician, and citizen should study. Analysts dissected every gesture, every pause, every subtle nuance in Chen's delivery. Political commentators debated the significance. Was this a turning point for civility in public life? Did Bondi's theatrics signal the dangers of style over substance in contemporary politics? Politicians weighed in with calculated statements. Some praised Chen for embodying principles over partisanship. Others seized the opportunity to criticize Bondi's approach, framing her performance as emblematic of an era where outrage is rewarded more than evidence. On Twitter, progressive voices amplified the narrative, celebrating Chen not just as a judge, but as a symbol of integrity, patience, and quiet strength. Immigrant communities in particular found resonance in his story. A child of hard-working parents rising above noise. embodying the values of diligence, resilience, and dignity. Post-tagged, Hojudoshu, immigrant pride, unshu, dignity. Wins gained thousands of shares in mere hours, a ripple of validation and collective pride sweeping across the platform. Even memes carried weight. One viral image paired Bondi mid-scream with a statue of Lady Justice, the caption reading, "Shouting doesn't move the scales." Another contrasted Chen's still hands against the courtroom chaos, highlighting his serenity as an almost superhuman attribute. It became more than entertainment. It was a shared emotional moment, a communal sigh of relief that logic, patience, and quiet courage could still prevail in a world dominated by noise. The responses weren't universally kind to Bondi. Trolls and critics alike lambasted her performance, branding it histrionic or overplayed. Yet within the criticism, a lesson emerged. There was power in observing, in waiting, in letting truth speak for itself. For many, Chen's composure wasn't just legal strategy. It was proof that restraint could inspire confidence, command attention, and even earn respect from those predisposed to anger. Across the internet, threads formed, debates ignited, and personal stories poured in. People recounted moments when they had felt overwhelmed by louder voices in their own lives. At work, in school, in public spaces, they drew courage from Chen's example, seeing in his quiet authority a model for navigating conflict without surrendering integrity. The courtroom drama became a mirror, reflecting the frustrations, hopes, and aspirations of countless viewers. Yet amid all the commentary, the memes, and the viral clips, a deeper question lingered. The conversation was loud, the reactions instantaneous, but would the nation take the lesson to heart? Would this moment be remembered merely as a viral spectacle, or would it spark reflection on the value of patience, dignity, and calm in the face of fury? No one could answer that yet. What was certain, however, was that the impact was already resonating. The shockwaves of that confrontation had reached far beyond the cameras, the hashtags, and the endless scroll of social media feeds. Every share, every comment, every stunned reaction carried the echo of that moment, and the world was watching to see what it might inspire. But beyond the commentary, the question remained: what lesson would America take from this clash? As the echoes of the courtroom faded into memory, Judge Edward Chen's presence remained. His calm, measured responses had not only quelled a singular storm of outrage, but had reframed the entire narrative. The confrontation was no longer about who shouted the loudest or who dominated the headlines for a fleeting moment. It had become a lesson in the enduring power of dignity. In Chen's quiet, unwavering composure, it was clear: restraint is strength, patience is power, and integrity cannot be amplified by volume. It must be embodied. Across the nation, viewers began to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. The spectacle of shouting and fury had been replaced by the resonance of quiet confidence. For once, it was not the theatrics that commanded attention. It was true standing firm, unshaken, undeniable. Chen's example demonstrated that lasting impact is rarely achieved through anger or intimidation. Instead, it is built on preparation, moral clarity, and the courage to remain steadfast when provoked. For immigrants and minorities, the resonance ran even deeper. Chen's life had been a testament to perseverance in the face of obstacles, a narrative familiar to those told to stay quiet or know your place. His triumph in that moment was universal, a mirror for anyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. It was proof that restraint and resolve could transform what others perceive as weakness into undeniable authority. This was not a victory confined to a courtroom. It was a blueprint for navigating a world that often rewards noise over nuance, aggression over ethics. The emotional impact rippled outward. Families watched and shared the clips with their children, framing Chen's calm as a model for how to handle conflict with grace. Colleagues circulated the video in workplaces, emphasizing the importance of measured response in professional and personal arenas alike. Social media posts flourished with messages of solidarity. If he can stay calm under fire, so can we. Patience is not passive, it is power. People celebrated not only Chen's intellect but his character. drawing inspiration from a man who had mastered the art of influence without aggression. The confrontation's crescendo was not in the volume of voices, but in the quiet clarity that emerged. The anger that had dominated the room dissolved under the weight of reason and principle. Bondi's yelling, once so commanding, seemed hollow in retrospect. The world witnessed that authority does not need to shout. Respect does not need to intimidate. In the stillness, viewers recognized the universal truth. Courage often manifests not in force, but in calm persistence. And true victory is measured not by the loudest applause, but by the enduring impact of one's integrity. Cinematically, the scene closed on Chen not as a figure of mere compliance or neutrality, but as the embodiment of a principle far greater than any individual clash. In a society too often captivated by spectacle, his example reminded everyone that there's a different kind of strength. One that inspires, uplifts, and commands attention precisely because it does not rely on theatrics. It was a victory for all who value justice, for all who strive to navigate life with both dignity and purpose. And so, as the nation absorbed the significance of that moment, one truth became undeniable. In a world full of shouting, it was silence that changed everything. Pam, Bondi screamed. Judge Edward Chen replied, and the nation gasped. That moment was more than a clash of personalities. It was a mirror reflecting the choices we make every day, whether to let outrage dictate our actions or to allow patience, integrity, and truth to guide us. In the chaos of noise, it is easy to forget that calm and dignity carry a power that outlasts any fleeting shout. Judge Chen's response was a lesson in clarity and courage. He proved that strength does not always roar, that authority does not need volume, that when faced with aggression, the quiet, steady voice of principle can dismantle even the most forceful attacks. In a world that often rewards spectacle over substance, Chen's composure reminded us that dignity always outshines arrogance, and calm always prevails over chaos. This is a call to the viewers. Carry that lesson into your own lives. Subscribe to stay inspired by moments where courage meets integrity. Share this story so others can witness the triumph of restraint over rage. Join the movement that values reason over shouting, action over theatrics, and truth over noise. Together we can celebrate those who lead with principle and empower those who have been underestimated or silenced. Because sometimes the quietest voice echoes the loudest in history. And in that echo we find hope, we find inspiration, and we find the courage to face our own storms with patience, dignity, and unwavering strength.